So, is Elden Ring Nightreign any good? Yeah, it's a lot of fun. The being able to run up walls and run up small ledges and run over barriers is so fun and just feels so satisfying to be able to do. And going back to the base game, I feel like it's going to be really frustrating when you come across situations where you're like, I wish I could just run up this little ledge right now, and you have to find a way around, especially in like the Mount Gelmir area. Like, man, having a wall climb ability in that region would be so nice. Not that you can totally just run all the way up the side of the wall, although you do have an item similar to the Spirit Spring, or a location, I should say, similar to the Spirit Spring where you could launch up like Torrent, but you can't literally just sprint all the way up a wall. You can go over small barriers and whatnot. If you haven't played yet, you'll see what I mean when you play, but man, it would be so nice to have that function in the main game. The sprint feature is really cool too, although that really in effect is just because you can't have Torrent in Nightreign. I would imagine they're never going to add Torrent in Nightreign. So the sprint basically is just to take the place of Torrent. I think one of the biggest issues the game solves is replayability from the base game, as standard Elden Ring is just so long. A lot of the complaints about it were the replayability. It's anywhere between 60 and 80 hours, probably even closer to 100 now, including the DLC, if you go around and do every nook and cranny. I don't even think there's necessarily anything wrong with having a game that long if it's a lot of fun and filled with good content and as good as Elden Ring is, but I think this is going to be a really good companion piece for people that just want to sit down and bang out a 45-minute playthrough without having to commit to 60 to 100 hours. I did absolutely no preparation for the network test, so when my first game loaded in, I had no idea what to do or where I was going. I had seen the trailers and that was really about it, so I had no idea what the actual strategy of the game was or where I was supposed to be going or what I was supposed to be doing, but that was kind of a lot of the fun of it, was learning this new game with other players and seeing how everything was going to play out. I think this is going to be the type of game that is easily playable with randoms, but I think it's going to be a lot simpler and more fun playing with friends on a headset where you can coordinate and communicate much better, instead of maybe one of your teammates that happened a few times would just run off in a random direction and you would be like, I don't know, bro, is that where we're going or should we go somewhere else? So I kind of ran into that issue a lot where teammates were kind of running off in random directions. I found that a little bit hard to coordinate, but it does seem like there's a function that you can place a marker to kind of indicate to your teammates where you would like to go, and then they could either go to that location or not. So that's a little bit of a helpful item. So maybe once we get more the hang of that, it'll be easier to play with randoms. One thing they could do to help solve some of those issues is to add the item where you're invading that you can use it and it spawns you closer to where the action is and where to the players are. I'd be surprised if they didn't add an item to that effect to the full game on release. I think that would be really useful because there were some instances where you're just really far away from your teammates and it'd be nice to just kind of spawn into at least near one of them. So I'd be surprised if they didn't add an item like that into the full game. The only reason I could see them not adding it is because obviously one of the main mechanics of the game is the rain closing in on you, and maybe they want you to be more aware of where the rain actually is and not be able to just use the item to rescue yourself at the last second. Maybe they feel like that could kind of throw off the gameplay a little bit. So that could be the only reason I would see them not adding it. As far as world and level design, I was more under the impression that the worlds were going to be much more procedurally generated. And I don't know if it's just for the beta for the network test, but it felt like the worlds I got into, at least, I don't know if this was true for everyone. I haven't watched that many videos, but it seemed like the world was pretty much exactly the same every time, as far as I could tell. Even enemies were in the same positions. I thought everything was going to be much more randomized and procedurally generated, where you might have a castle in one spot with different enemies in it one time and other enemies in another. Like, I thought everything was going to be a lot more random, but everything seemed to be the same every single time. So I'm curious in the main game on the full release how much that's going to change, or if you're just going to have different worlds that you can get into, different set levels every single time, but just the loot is what's randomized and not the actual level itself. So I'm curious to see how that is upon the main release. One of my favorite parts of the network test, and I did know about this because it was in the trailer, but was fighting the centipede demon from Dark Souls, who was just super cool to see in 2025 Elden Ring graphics and style. And it just makes me die for a Dark Souls 1 remake, which I would be shocked if never happened. Like, that game a Dark Souls remake would absolutely sell like crazy. People would love it. I know a lot of people would be concerned about how they would handle the atmosphere and that sort of thing, because I know some people had those kind of problems with the Demon Souls remake. I personally absolutely adore the Demon Souls remake, so for me that doesn't matter as much, but I would absolutely love to see Dark Souls 1 be remade in the style of Elden Ring. I think that would just be so cool. It's not going to, but I would love to see just every single boss from all 3 Dark Souls games in Elden Ring Nightreign. I just think that would be the coolest thing ever. I always wish there was one Souls game that just had like every boss they've ever made in it, and I don't see a reason why they wouldn't. I know some people would say like, oh, it messes up the lore, but like, I care way more about fun gameplay than I do about the lore. So for me, I would think that was so cool to see every From Software boss in the same game. That would just be spectacular. It does look like from the trailer that Nameless King from Dark Souls 3 is already in, so we'll have that at the very least. And I believe Duke's Dear Freya from Dark Souls 2, so there will be a handful of them. One of the fun things to kind of get used to that was different for me is 95% of the time I play Souls game solo at this point. So having teammates and the boss aggroing in different areas and different directions was kind of a challenge to get used to. It's pretty weird when you're used to the boss always being aggroed on you, and then all of a sudden he's aggroed in different directions on different teammates. So I think there's definitely a lot of strategy that could be implemented to that effect. So I'm curious to see how I enjoy that more and more as time goes on with this game. And similarly, I don't know if it's just because there are 3 players, but the bosses seemed insanely tanky. I'm sure I wasn't taking advantage of all the upgrades, as I saw that you could upgrade your weapon with smithing stones. I don't know exactly how that's going to work, how far your weapon is going to be able to scale up, and exactly how all that works yet, but I found so many instances, especially on some of the bosses, where I was doing almost no damage, like so little damage, the little yellow part of the bar wasn't even appearing. So again, I don't know if they're just scaled up super high because there's 3 of you, but it was weird doing so little damage to bosses. Although, on the other hand, I suppose they were well balanced, because we had quite a few boss fights where it came down to the boss having like a little bit of health left, and myself and my teammates had no flasks and a little bit of health left, and it kind of came down to the wire. And even this insanely close one that I'll post here where Morgott must have had like 1 HP left and we all died at the same time, which was pretty funny and pretty unfortunate. I was like, no! But I guess it was pretty well balanced in that regard. Also, the addition of the new skills for each player type are pretty cool. For the Wilder, it looks like they're calling it the Onslaught Stake, which is pretty much the stake driver from, I forgot the exact name of the weapon, but the weapon from Bloodborne. It's pretty much that, except with a super giant like explosion attached to it. That is really fun to use. And then for the Guardian was the only other character I played with. They're calling it the Wings of Salvation, where you can fly way up into the air and then spike yourself down for an AoE effect, which I couldn't get to do a ton of damage, if I'm being honest, but it's still pretty fun to use. And I don't know why the Guardian can't fly when he has wings, but it was a fun move to use in combat. And I'm definitely going to try the Recluse and the Duchess out later today for the network test that's coming up this afternoon. So I think that'll be a lot of fun to see how their moves work. I saw a little bit when my teammates were using them, but I can't wait to try out them as well. And I assume there'll be a bunch more characters released when the full game comes out too. So those are about my thoughts for now. I only played about 2 hours of the test because in my local time, I'm on the East Coast. I'm a New Englander, so it was from 10 p.m. to 1, but I had originally woken up for the 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. I woke up at 5:30 in the morning, which for me is insanely early. I normally wake up at like 8:30, so by the time it was 10 at night, I was just too tired. I didn't even stay up for the last hour. So those are my thoughts for now, as I only played a couple hours so far, but I'm sure after I play more this afternoon and another couple tests, I'll have many more thoughts, but it was a lot of fun. I think you guys should definitely give it a try. I can't wait for the full game. Catch you guys later. Peace.